She didn't buy the airfield for the hangar. She bought it for the silence. After her father died, and the town turned to whispers and paperwork, she needed somewhere the noise couldn't find her. What she found instead, sitting quietly in the shadow of Hangar 7, was a plane that hadn't been touched since the war, and a story that would give her life a new kind of engine. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. She first saw the listing on a Wednesday. 14 acres, 2 runways, and 4 abandoned hangars, located 35 miles outside of Fort Summer. No pictures, no real description. Just one blurry satellite shot, and the words, "Private aviation property, must sell, cash only." Most people would have ignored it. Most people did. But Riley Monroe wasn't most people. She'd just buried her father 3 weeks prior, inherited a half-functional machine shop, and felt like the world was holding its breath around her. So when she saw the ad, she called. The voice on the other end didn't ask many questions, just gave directions and said, "If you bring 10 grand in cash and don't ask too many questions, it's yours." She showed up 2 days later in steel-toed boots and a dusty Dodge Ram that still smelled like her dad's coffee. The Airfield looked more like a forgotten pasture with a broken fence and an old weather vane spinning lopsided on a rusted pole. The wind hit different out there, emptier, like the sky had room to grieve. Hangars 1 through 6 looked like old barns welded shut. But Hangar 7, that one sat at the edge of the property, half sunk into prairie grass, with paint peeling off the number like the building was trying to forget its own name. She walked the perimeter slow. Crows scattered from the roof. Every step crunched over broken gravel and weeds. And then she saw the door slightly ajar, metal buckled, but just enough space to squeeze through. She ducked inside. At first, it was pitch black. Just her boots echoing off concrete, and the sharp scent of dust, old oil, and something metallic beneath it all. Then her eyes adjusted, and there it was. Nose pointed toward the hangar doors, tail swallowed by shadow, a World War II P-38 Lightning. Camouflage chipped, windows frosted with grime. Tires half deflated, and vines crawling through the wheel wells. But intact, like it had been wheeled in after its last flight, and then simply left. She didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't even think. The plane sat like a monument, twin booms stretching wide like the bones of a sleeping giant. The red stenciling was still legible. 3rd Recon, 1944. Her heart thudded loud enough she thought it might echo. No way this was real. Planes like this belonged in museums or millionaires' collections. Not forgotten, in a field bought for less than a used Civic. She climbed the ladder, bolted to the side, and wiped the cockpit window with her sleeve. The glass smeared, but revealed more than she was ready for. A cracked leather pilot's seat, flight instruments frozen mid-century, and resting in the seat an envelope, yellowed, unsealed. Her name was written on the front. Not just her name, Riley Monroe in handwriting she recognized immediately, her father's. And just like that, the wind outside stopped. The hangar fell dead silent. Her hand hovered above the envelope. The world felt like it had just rotated slightly off its axis. This wasn't just a forgotten airfield anymore. This was a mystery someone meant for her to find. And for the first time in weeks, Riley didn't feel lost. She felt chosen. She took the envelope in shaking hands and sat on the cold wing of the plane. She didn't open it. Not yet. Some things, you had to breathe into first. Some stories, they only begin when you're quiet enough to listen. And Hangar 7 had been waiting a long time. The second time Riley stepped into Hangar 7, it was just past dawn, and the light came in sideways through broken skylights, painting streaks across the concrete like sunlit scars. She carried a thermos of burnt coffee, and that envelope still unopened, tucked into her back pocket. Something about the hangar didn't want to be rushed, like the plane had its own gravity, and now that she'd seen it, she couldn't stay away. The P-38 was still there, of course. Same chipped paint, same vines clawing up the landing gear. But now it looked different. Not just forgotten, preserved. The dust on the fuselage was thick, but undisturbed. like no one had touched it in decades. She ran her hand down the cold aluminum body, fingers brushing over faded insignias and bullet patch welds that looked hand-done. This wasn't a display piece. This plane had seen combat and survived. She found a rusted tool cart tucked behind the left wing and pulled it into the light. Most of the drawers were frozen shut. The ones that opened held sockets, pliers, and old wax-wrapped spark plugs, all U.S. military issue, stamped 1943. Whoever last worked on this bird hadn't just left their tools behind. They'd left history. She climbed back into the cockpit and sat down slowly, careful not to disturb anything. Dust motes swirled around her in the slanted light. The seat creaked. The controls were stiff but present throttle, yoke, rudder pedals. Every dial, every switch, every gauge frozen mid-narrative. The kind of silence that doesn't come from neglect, but reverence. And then she noticed something else. A name etched into the dash with a penknife. Colonel Everett Monroe. Her breath caught. Her father never talked much about his side of the family, said the men were military, quiet, and mostly ghosts by the time he came along. She remembered a single photo growing up, a black and white picture of a man standing beside a P-38, hand on the nose, smile half hidden under a flight helmet. She'd asked once who it was. He just said, "A man who never made it home." She thought it was just a story. Now she wasn't sure. Riley reached into her pocket and pulled out the envelope again. Her name, his handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. She slid her thumb under the flap and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, torn at the top. It read, "If you're reading this, then I didn't have time to explain. Hangar 7 was our family's secret. My grandfather flew her. He was part of something no one was supposed to know about. And now she's yours. Finish what he started. You'll know what to do." Dad, that was it. No signature, no date. Just a message from a man who never said much and a ghost of a grandfather she'd only seen once in a dusty photo. She folded the letter back into the envelope and slid it into the side panel of the cockpit. Not out of disrespect, but because it felt like it belonged there, like the plane needed it as much as she did. She leaned back, her head resting on the seat where Colonel Everett Monroe had once Saturday. The air smelled like grease and ghosts. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about how broken her life felt. She was thinking about how whole this plane still was and what it might mean to bring it back. Because whatever had grounded it wasn't just time. It was unfinished business. And Riley Monroe had just inherited every bolt of it. Riley spent the next 2 days sleeping in the old storage room behind Hangar 7. No bed, no heat, just a cot she'd hauled from the back of her truck and a toolbox at her feet. She couldn't explain it, the pull to stay. There were no showers, no cell service, barely any power. But each morning, as light leaked through the slats in the hangar walls and the silhouette of the P-38 shimmered in the dust, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The airfield had more to say. She started cleaning the cockpit first. Not with chemicals or polish, just patience. A dry cloth, gentle pressure, and a reverence for every smudge of grime left by hands long gone. She unscrewed the radio panel and found an old matchbox behind it. Inside were 4 spent shells and a torn Polaroid of a young man in uniform, grinning like someone who hadn't yet tasted war. On the back, faint pencil scribbles read, "If she makes it home, we all do." There was no name, no date, just hope sealed in a tiny cardboard box. And then she found the second letter, wedged between the seat cushions, folded tight and wrapped in wax paper, yellowed with age. She almost missed it. But her hand brushed the edge while removing debris, and something about the way it caught on her glove made her pause. She pulled it free, unwrapped the paper, and saw her last name again. To the Monroe who finds her next if she ever gets found. This wasn't her dad's handwriting. It was neater, sharper, inked with care, not desperation. Riley sat cross-legged on the wing, knees pulled to her chest, and began to read. "You don't know me, but we're blood. I'm Everett Monroe, and if this bird is still sitting in Hangar 7 when you read this, then I didn't make it. Or maybe I did and just couldn't bring myself to fly her again. Both are possible. Either way, She's more than just a plane. She's a promise, a map of something hidden in plain sight. They told us to bury it, the mission, the modifications, the payload. They told us to forget. But Monroe men aren't great at forgetting. So I left her here. I left her intact. If you've got fuel in your soul and grease on your hands, you'll know what to do. But tread carefully. The systems were advanced. Too advanced for 44. We weren't supposed to test them, but we did. I flew her once all the way to the edge of radar. What I saw changed everything. I logged it in the panel behind the left gun bay. But if you get there, you better be sure. Once you know the truth, you don't get to go back to sleep. Riley's throat went dry. She stared at the letter like it might rearrange itself, like maybe she'd misread it. The systems were advanced? What the hell did that mean? World War II-era planes didn't come with experimental anything, unless they were part of black projects, and even then, those were myths. Tall tales for war buffs and tinfoil podcasts. But this didn't feel like fiction. This felt like legacy. She read the letter 3 more times, each line hitting harder than the last. Her grandfather hadn't just flown this plane. He'd hidden it and left a warning. That night, she sat on the tail of the aircraft as the sun dipped below the hills. Her boots dangled off the edge, letter clutched in one hand, flashlight in the other. She didn't go digging into the gun bay just yet, because Everett was right. Once you look for truth, you don't get to unsee it. Riley didn't sleep that night. She sat cross-legged in the doorway of Hangar 7, sipping cold coffee and watching the stars burn holes in the sky. Somewhere between the 3rd cup and the 5th owl screech, she made a decision. Not because she felt brave, because the feeling of not knowing had become unbearable. Her grandfather had flown missions in this P-38. Missions he never reported. Missions he wrote down only in warnings and whispered letters. And now she had inherited both the plane and the silence. By sunrise, she was elbow-deep inside the left gun bay. The access panel was stiff with corrosion, but gave way under the slow persuasion of heat and patience. She removed it carefully, prying each screw until it dropped into her palm with a metallic clink. Inside wasn't just wiring. There was a hollow, barely big enough for a shoebox. And in that space, wrapped in an oilcloth, layered in wax paper, was a black leather journal. She didn't open it in the bay. She brought it out into the light, placed it on the P-38's wing, and unfolded the cover with the same reverence one might reserve for a sacred book. The first page was neat, almost military in structure. Flight log Lieutenant Colonel Everett Monroe. Date: June 3rd, 1944. Mission: High Altitude Recon, Operation Quiet Eye. Aircraft: Modified P-38. Lightning Prototype #7B. Sparrow. Riley blinked. She flipped ahead. Pages of logs, each one stranger than the last. Altitude data beyond design limits. Radar evasion maneuvers. Thermal imaging tests that didn't exist in 1944. There were sketches of wiring layouts. Annotations about electromagnetic interference. Warnings about strange engine resonance above 35,000 feet. And then she found the last entry, dated just before her grandfather's discharge. Today, I saw something above the storm line. Not clouds, not weather. A shape, reflective, silent. Moved faster than any bird or jet I've ever seen. I climbed a chase, lost visibility. Next thing I knew, I was back over the field, disoriented. Fuel gone, time lost, 3 hours unaccounted for. Flight crew never filed the report. Said I imagined it. But I know what I saw. This plane did something no plane should do. If anyone finds this journal, be careful. There's more sky out there than they let us know. Riley sat still, the journal trembling in her hands. The wind picked up across the field, but inside the hangar, everything remained deathly still. This wasn't just about restoring a warbird anymore. This was about unlocking something someone had buried for a reason. Her grandfather hadn't abandoned the plane. He'd hidden it, protected it, preserved it in a tomb of rust and secrets. And her father? He must have known. Maybe not everything, but enough to lead her here, to point her toward a past wrapped in more than history. He was a mechanic, old school, stubborn, loyal. He didn't chase dreams. But he understood machinery, and he understood his daughter. Leaving her the airfield wasn't just a gift. It was a test. One he trusted she'd pass. By the time the sun climbed overhead, Riley had made another decision. She was going to rebuild the plane, not just to fly, to understand what her grandfather saw, to trace the ghost flight he never got to explain, to finish whatever the hell Operation Quiet Eye had started. The engine didn't work. The hydraulics were a mess. Half the systems were obsolete, but the frame was solid. The plane wanted to fly again, and Riley Monroe had inherited more than just the metal. She'd inherited the mission. Riley dragged her welder out from the truck the next morning. It had been her dad's, a Miller 210, with a cracked handle and initials scratched into the case. She remembered the way he used to talk to it like an old friend, coaxing it to life when the arc stuttered. "Tools remember who you are," he'd always say. "If you treat them right, they'll bring you home." She didn't know if she believed that. But standing in Hangar 7, staring up at a forgotten plane her grandfather risked everything to hide, she hoped it was true. The P-38 was a mess under the skin. Corroded fuel lines. Cracked manifolds. The left engine was seized solid. Some of the wires were still wrapped in the original cloth insulation, so brittle they turned to powder between her fingers. She spent the first day cataloging everything, every bolt, every tube, every mystery. But it wasn't just mechanical. There were emotional fractures, too. The kind you couldn't fix with wrenches. She found herself crying without warning. Not hard, not dramatic. Just silent tears that fell while she worked, smeared by the back of her glove before she even registered them. Something about touching the same bolts her grandfather once turned. Maybe even her father brought grief to the surface like oil rising in water. She wasn't just restoring a plane. She was resurrecting 3 generations of memory, and none of them were there to help. By the end of the second week, the cockpit had been stripped and cleaned. She'd pulled every removable panel, photographed every marking, and started sourcing parts online from forums and vintage aircraft salvage yards. Money was tight. The airfield had cost most of what she had. But every time she considered stopping, she remembered the journal's last entry, the shape in the clouds, the lost time, the flight that changed everything. And then, one afternoon, a truck rolled onto the property. Dust kicked up in its wake. No markings. Just an old Chevy flatbed with a lone figure in the cab. Riley grabbed a wrench and stepped out of the hangar as the truck stopped. The driver door creaked open. The man who stepped out looked like he'd crawled straight out of the past. Denim coveralls, leather boots, oil-stained hands, gray beard down to his collarbone, and eyes that had seen things most people would call lies. "You Monroe's girl?" he asked. Riley froze. "I am." He nodded like that, explained everything. "Name's Howard. Your grandfather and I flew out of England in '44. I was a wrench monkey on the base. Helped build that bird from the inside out." She stared, unsure whether to believe him. He saw it in her eyes. "Check the left intake panel," he said. "You'll find my initials etched behind the cowling. They didn't let us sign anything, but we found ways." Riley didn't move. "I saw the listing," he continued. "Didn't believe it at first. Thought that plane was gone forever. But then I heard your name." She swallowed. "Why now?" "Because ghosts don't stay buried forever," Howard said. "And because some machines remember what they were built to do." They stood there, silent but not uncomfortable. Later, when she finally checked the panel, she found it. Small, scratched into the aluminum behind layers of dust. HL. The 2nd of July 1944. And just like that, Riley Monroe wasn't alone anymore. Howard didn't say much that first week. He showed up each morning before Riley, usually with a thermos of black coffee and a quiet nod. He never asked for payment, never asked questions. He just worked with the kind of instinct you couldn't fake. He moved around the P-38 like a man haunted, his gloved hands brushing across surfaces with both precision and reverence. Every so often he'd pause, place a hand on the fuselage, and whisper something under his breath. Riley never asked what. She had the feeling it wasn't meant for her. But one afternoon, after 7 days of working in near silence, he broke it. "This plane shouldn't exist," he said, kneeling beside the right landing strut. His voice was low, flat, like it had been waiting years to be spoken. Riley looked up from the wiring harness she was inspecting. "What do you mean?" He stood, wiped his hands, and leaned against the wing. "Back in '44, they told us we were building a recon prototype. Something faster, lighter. But the engineers started bringing in tech we'd never seen before. Heat shielding, cabling that didn't burn. They even had magneto controls we didn't have schematics for." He exhaled. "We didn't ask questions. We just did the work." "And my grandfather?" she asked. Howard's gaze wandered. "Everett was one of the best. Smart, methodical, fearless. But after that last flight, he trailed off. He came back different. Different how? Quiet. Jumpier. Like he'd seen something up there he wasn't supposed to. A week later, the whole project got shut down. They told us to dismantle everything. The prototype disappeared. So did Everett." He looked at her now, eyes steady. "Until I saw your name on that deed." A cold silence followed. "Why didn't you come forward?" Riley asked. "All these years?" Howard hesitated. "Because I thought I was crazy. Everyone did. The records were burned. The airstrip wiped off every map. I convinced myself it was a dream. Until I saw this bird again." He placed a hand on the wing. "And it remembered me." That night, Riley couldn't sleep. She sat in the cockpit, long after Howard had gone, running her fingers over the controls, the old throttle, the worn leather yoke. She imagined Everett Monroe flying blind above cloud lines, chasing something not built by man. She imagined her father, silent for decades, holding the weight of this truth alone. And now her, the last link in a chain of vanished men and vanished missions. The next morning, Howard didn't show. She waited, texted, called though she never expected an answer. She drove into town, asked at the diner, the gas station. No one had seen him. It was like he'd vanished into the dust. Back at the hangar, she found a small envelope, taped to the inside of the fuselage, right where he used to sit during breaks. It was folded twice and smelled faintly of grease. Inside was a note in thick block letters. "It's not just about fixing the plane. You need to finish it. Look under the auxiliary panel." He left more than a journal. End of grind, end of from. That was all. No goodbye. No signature. Riley stood in the silence of Hangar 7, heart pounding, the note trembling in her hand. She didn't know where Howard had gone, but she knew one thing for sure. He hadn't vanished. He'd just gone back into hiding, and whatever was waiting under that auxiliary panel, it was meant for her. The auxiliary panel wasn't meant to be opened not easily. Riley had to remove the pilot seat entirely just to get the right angle. The screws were old, but hadn't rusted like the others. They'd been replaced recently, probably by her father, or maybe even Howard, long before she knew his name. The metal behind the panel was clean, almost too clean. She ran her flashlight along the seam and saw a fine groove cut into the aluminum, a hidden compartment. Her fingers trembled as she pried it open. Inside was a sealed pouch wrapped in military-grade plastic. She pulled it out, placed it on the workbench, and unzipped the top. What spilled out didn't make sense, not at first. A set of blueprints, microfilm slides, a brass badge from the Department of War dated 1944, and a single cassette tape labeled in fading ink, "EM Final Flight." Riley stared at it like it might detonate. She hadn't seen a cassette player in years. But there was one in her dad's old stereo setup, stashed in the back of the shop, beneath a stack of forgotten manuals. She drove there in silence, tape in her lap, windows down, the wind pressing questions into her skull. Back at the garage, she slid the tape into the deck, pressed play, and braced for static. Instead, her grandfather's voice filled the room, slow, deliberate, and steady. "This is Everett Monroe, recording post-flight notes from June 3rd, 1944. If this tape is playing, I didn't have time to finish what I started. The aircraft, Sparrow 7B, performed as modified. Altitude exceeded 48,000 feet. Cabin temperature fluctuated. Electrical readings spiked beyond safety margins. Then, something appeared. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't weather. It moved like thought. It shimmered like sunlight on water, but cold. It followed me for 13 minutes. Then, I blacked out. I woke up 280 miles off course. No fuel used. Clock said I'd been gone 21 minutes. My watch said 3 hours. Something took me. I don't know how else to say it. I don't think they meant harm. But they wanted me to see. I saw something. A shape. A design burned into cloud layers. A sound I still hear when I close my eyes. And then they brought me back. I wasn't supposed to remember. But I do. And I think the plane does too. The tape clicked to silence. Riley sat motionless. The room spinning. Her breath shallow. Every part of her told her to run to forget this. To sell the airfield. To burn the journal. To walk away from whatever had just torn a hole in her family's history. But her hands moved on their own. Back at Hangar 7, she took the blueprints to the table, spread them out, and began to study them. These weren't standard schematics. They showed wiring for systems not found in any P-38 even prototypes. Panels labeled with symbols she didn't recognize. Notes in a shorthand only Everett must have understood. And at the bottom of one page, a single phrase etched in bold red ink. To start her properly, you'll have to feel it, not just turn it. Riley traced the ignition system with her finger. The final junction wasn't electrical. It was analog, mechanical. A hidden switch wired into the rudder pedal itself. That night, she climbed back into the cockpit, reconnected the wiring, bypassed the safety fuses, and pressed the master ignition. Nothing. Her chest tightened. Then she remembered the phrase. Feel it, not just turn it. She took a breath, reached down, and pressed the rudder pedal gently. Click. A soft hum rose beneath her. Then fire. The right engine coughed to life, then roared. Dust exploded off the walls. Light pulsed from the panel like a heart restarting. The entire hangar vibrated with something ancient, not just mechanical, but alive. Riley didn't scream, didn't cheer. She just sat there, eyes wide, hands gripping the yoke, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The plane had waited decades for someone who could understand it. Now it was awake. The next morning, Riley was still shaking, not from fear, from reverence. The engine had started, the right engine. After 70 years of silence, after hidden compartments, erased missions, and ghost voices on cassette tapes, the P-38 had breathed again, and she had brought it back. Not through guesswork or manuals, but through something deeper, something inherited. Word spread fast. By noon, the local veterans group had heard. By evening, a news drone circled the airfield, catching grainy footage of Riley walking across the tarmac like a girl guarding a secret too big to name. She didn't invite them in. Not yet. The plane wasn't ready, neither was she. But someone else called. A man named Mason Langford, head curator of the National Warbird Memorial Association. He said he'd heard through an old mutual, probably Howard, that a certain plane had woken up in New Mexico. Said he'd been chasing rumors about Sparrow 7B for decades. I don't want to buy it, he promised. I just want the world to see it fly again. Riley didn't answer. Then he added, We're organizing a flyover for Veterans Remembrance Week. There's an opening slot, sunrise slot. No speeches, no press, just flight. If you think she's ready. She didn't sleep for 3 nights. Every waking hour was spent under the belly of the plane. Howard didn't return, but it was almost like she could still feel him there in every bolt she turned, every rusted piece she replaced. She installed a new magneto, rewired the primary fuel pump, and flushed the hydraulics. The left engine was neck stubborn, full of grit. But on the 4th morning it started, and the sound it made wasn't just noise, it was memory. When the day came, she loaded the P-38 onto a lowboy trailer and escorted it across 3 counties. No fanfare. Just taillights blinking in early dawn, and the ghost of her father's voice in her head. If you're gonna fly, fly like you mean it. The airfield in Colorado was bigger, cleaner, polished hangars, sharp uniforms. But nothing looked alive like Hangar 7 had. Nothing felt real. Until she saw the other planes, Mustangs, Hellcats, Corsairs, all restored, all breathing legacy. She parked near the edge of the staging area. Mechanics and pilots walked by, nodding, then stopping, staring. "Is that a Lightning?" one whispered. Riley didn't answer. She was in the zone. Checks, gauges, pressure, throttle. Her nerves were fire. Her heart ice. But when she climbed into the cockpit and looked out across the field, she felt something settle in her chest. She wasn't flying for show. She was flying to complete a promise. The tower gave the go. Engines roared. The P-38 rolled forward like it had been waiting to stretch its wings since the day it was buried. It lifted smoothly, too smoothly, and climbed into the sky as the sun cracked the horizon. Riley held the yoke tight, teeth gritted, every muscle on edge. Then, at 8,000 feet it happened. The static in her headset, the flicker in the gauges. And then, silence. Not in the engines, in the air. It was like the world muted. No wind, no vibration. Just her heartbeat and the soft hum of something else, something, watching. And out of the clouds, a shape shimmered. Not a plane, not a drone, a form. Silent, geometric, familiar. It moved beside her, mirrored her, then drifted upward into the sun and vanished like mist. Riley didn't panic. She didn't scream. She whispered one word into the headset. "Everett?" The air cleared. The sound returned. The P-38 leveled out. She didn't chase it. She didn't need to. The sky had spoken, and it remembered her name. Riley circled once before descending, wheels kissing tarmac like a whisper. The other planes had landed already. Their pilots watched from the edge of the field, sunglasses lifted, hands shielding eyes, but no one said a word. The Lightning coasted down the runway, its twin booms glowing gold in the sunrise, its shadow stretching behind like a trail of memory too long to measure. She parked near the hangar, shut the engines off, and sat in silence. Her gloved hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from release. Everything in her life, up until that point, had felt like holding her breath. The plane, the hangar, the legacy, all of it had been waiting to exhale through her. And now, finally, it had. Mason Langford approached with reverence, hat in hand. "I've seen 1,000 flights," he said quietly. "But that wasn't just flight. That was something else." Riley looked up. Her voice still caught somewhere behind her ribs. It was him. Mason didn't ask who. Maybe he didn't need to. He placed a folded document on the hood of her truck. "That's your certificate," he said. "Official entry into the Warbird Legacy Registry. Only one of its kind. You should be proud." She didn't touch it. Instead, she reached into the cockpit and pulled out her grandfather's journal. She walked to the edge of the field, where the wind moved soft across the grass, and opened it to the last blank page. She wrote 3 words. "Flight completed." Witnessed, then closed the book. The trip back to New Mexico felt different. The road didn't feel long. The silence wasn't heavy. She kept the windows down, let the air move through her hair. She was done chasing ghosts. Now she was carrying them. Hangar 7 looked smaller than she remembered when she pulled in. More familiar. More hers. The moment the truck backed the P-38 into place, the sun broke through the clouds like an omen. The hangar swallowed the plane again, but not in secrecy. In peace. Over the next few weeks, she repainted the walls, added lights, rewired the outlets. People started visiting. Vets, mechanics, pilots who'd heard whispers of what she'd done. They brought photos, stories, tools. Some just came to stand beside the plane and cry. And every evening she'd sit on the wing, coffee in hand, and look out over the airfield, not waiting, just listening. Sometimes she swore she could still hear that low hum, not the engines but the one inside her bones. Then one night, Howard returned. He didn't knock, didn't call, just appeared in the doorway like smoke from a long-burned fire. He looked at her, then the plane, then back at her again. "You saw it," he said. She nodded once. He walked up, touched the fuselage like greeting an old friend, and smiled. "Then it's done. What happens now?" she asked. He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much and whispered, "Now we remember." Riley never flew the P-38 again. Not because she was afraid, but because some stories only need one telling. She wheeled it into the heart of Hangar 7 and built the space around it like a shrine. Not a museum, not a display, a place where memory could breathe. The old hangar, once forgotten by maps and time, now pulsed with quiet reverence. School kids came on field trips. Veterans left medals at the nose cone. Even strangers with no tie to aviation walked in and left changed. But for Riley, everything had shifted. She woke up earlier now, drank her coffee slower. Her hands still bore the scars of the rebuild burns, cuts, grease stains that never quite washed out. But those marks didn't feel like damage anymore. They felt like inheritance. Proof that she had done something impossible. Not just restored a machine, but healed a fracture in her family's story no one else had dared to face. She hung the flight journal behind glass, framed the photo of Everett beside it, him in that grainy black and white, hand on the nose of the Lightning, eyes shaded but certain. Below it, she mounted the cassette tape. Next to it, the patch that had fallen from the pilot's seat when she first opened the cockpit. 3rd Recon. Operation Quiet Eye. Her own quiet operation was now complete. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the wind rolled across the runway like a tide, she sat cross-legged on the tarmac, back against the plane's cool fuselage, journal in her lap. She wasn't reading it this time, just holding it. Sometimes it wasn't about the answers. Sometimes it was about the weight of the questions, and knowing you'd been trusted to carry them. Leo, a kid from town who had taken an interest in her work, wandered into the hangar. 16 too many questions, always smelling like gas station candy and ambition. He sat beside her and asked, "So what was it like? Flying it?" She paused. "It felt like remembering something I never lived," she said. He didn't understand, not fully. But that was okay. Some things you don't explain. You just pass forward. She handed him a socket wrench and nodded toward an old radial engine they'd picked up at a military auction 2 weeks back. "You want to learn?" she asked. His face lit up, and just like that, a new story began. Because Riley Monroe had stopped chasing ghosts. She was building legacies, now one student, one story, one bolt at a time. Hangar 7 wasn't haunted anymore. It was alive. It hummed with purpose. A cathedral made of steel and sweat and sky. The Lightning sat in the center like a heartbeat, not a relic, a reminder that the past doesn't vanish. It waits quietly, patiently, for someone brave enough to listen, and when it finds them, it flies again.